We got faith. Don't feel no way. So Jaja that was Harambe by Rita Marley. Rita Marley, wife to the late great Bob Marley. It is Juneteenth week. Hello, Mimi. Good to see you. So it is Juneteenth week. Juneteenth this year is June 19th. Well, June 19th on Wednesday this week. And Juneteenth commemorates the day enslaved people of African descent in Texas learned that they were free from American slavery. All right, and I got that right out of Google. So we're bringing you a pre-Juneteenth episode today, and my guest is going to enlighten us as to the Black body as a sanctuary and how we can reclaim our birthright to thrive. So Big Up Yourself originals, and welcome to another episode of the Big Up Yourself Show. I am your host, Winsome Alexander, a self-empowerment mentor. And I was named one of Texas's most inspiring women. Now, this show brings you inspirational stories of personal strength, resilience, and achievement. And if you are into healing and personal growth, you are invited to subscribe, like the videos, comment, and share. Welcome, and I'm glad you could join us. My guest today is the amazing Antoinette Cooper, who I've been waiting for more than 2 years to join this show. But the timing is perfect. It is the week of Juneteenth, and oh my gosh, she is here. Antoinette Cooper is here. Wow. We're going to learn a little bit about her, but first, let me just go through her bio real quick. Antoinette Cooper is a multidisciplinary artist, educator, and organizer with over 20 years' experience. Her work focuses on healing collective trauma through the arts, ancestral wisdom, and embodied practices. Antoinette is the founder of Black Exhale, a nonprofit dedicated to creating sanctuary spaces for the liberated Black body. Her forthcoming documentary poetry collection, titled Unruly, will be published January 2025. She's a TEDx speaker as well. Oh, well, okay, wait a minute. I have a visual, I promise. She's a TEDx speaker, right? And her website is AntoinetteCooper.com. Antoinette, yes. Welcome to the show after like 2 years of chasing you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And yes, all perfect timing. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So at this juncture of the show, I usually start out asking my guests, because I'm curious about how people wear their names, right? And the relationship that they have with their names and how it relates to their story. So I want to know about your name. How do you pronounce it, first of all? Who named you? Is there a meaning to your name? And how does it fit into your story today?
Well, actually, I was born in Jamaica, and I have this experience of two different names: the name that I was called as a child, and then my birth certificate name. So my birth certificate name is Antoinette. And I did not know my name until I'd come to the US and enrolled in school. And so they call you by the name that's on your birth certificate. So I grew up being called Karen.
Yes, because we do that in Jamaica. We give you a nickname and we call you that, but your birth certificate name is different. Got it.
Yes. And then Antoinette, I didn't like Antoinette. It was so unfamiliar as a child. And when I was getting my citizenship in the US, I had the option. I think I must have voiced repeatedly I didn't like my name. And so I had the option of changing my name to Karen. And I said, you know what? I'll get used to it. And so I stuck with Antoinette. My mother had this affinity for French names.
Yes.
And so that's how she chose Antoinette. And in looking it up, it means praiseworthy.
And you are indeed praiseworthy. Yes, you are indeed. Oh my gosh. See, that's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
You know the history of you know, I recently found out that there is a university course named The History of Your Name. And people have to, as part of their university credit, have to go and search up the history of their names.
Wow.
So your name is really important to your identity, right?
Yes,
and the energy that your name carries is an integral part of your story, right? Wow, what a beautiful name, praiseworthy. Love it. That's what Mimi is saying. Mimi is saying, that's what I'm talking about, Antoine. I'm so glad you didn't change to Karen.
And you know, like there's something there about my childhood self saying, I'll grow into that.
Yes.
And at the time I couldn't recognize it. And that's actually been my healing journey, like recognizing that I am praiseworthy.
Wow. That is so beautiful. That's hitting me in all the right places. Thanks for sharing that.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. So now, Antoinette, we are talking about the Black body as a sanctuary. I'm so excited about this. And we'll be discussing 3 steps to reclaim our birthright to thrive, right? And we'll get into that. But let's start with some of your backstory. The time when you had to navigate being an immigrant to America. Set it up for us. Where does that story begin?
I came to the US when I was 4 years old. The first place that I came was to the projects in Harlem. And my mother at the time was married to an African-American man, and his mother, like, she had the apartment in Harlem, and she's from the South. So I remember my coming to the US through her. And she, just with her Southern accent, she's just like, I remember when you first came to this country, you just were as black as a crow.
What?
And she's like,
wasn't she also black?
She was black, but she wasn't saying it in any derogatory way. But I think just because I'd been kissed by the sun just that much in Jamaica. And she said, you just were as black as a crow, and I could count every rib in your body. And you had on this big hat, and the hat just was swallowing you up. And then she just do this old folks laugh. And she just has the best memory of me. So sometimes I just tap into her. She's 94 now.
Yeah.
And I just asked her, tell me again about when I first came to this country.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's my memory of, well, through her, my memory of being in the US, and then being in school and not fully fitting in, not as of course, for me, it could have turned into this source of trauma, but it's part of the immigrant experience that whenever you come to a new place, you're not going to fit in. And there was once the teacher brought in, I don't know if she had an avocado or she had a picture of an avocado. Said, what is this? And no one knew what it was. And I'm just like, ooh, I know. And she called on me and I'm like, Pear. And she's like, no. And I was just like, it is up here. It is.
Right.
And so like the name that I call it, I was actually correct, but she knew it by a different name. And I knew I was correct. And so I started tapping into my mind of, okay, what is it that these people call it? Like they have a different name for it. But I didn't undermine my own knowing that it is called a pear, but like she had a different name. And then I just thought, and I was like, ooh, I know, avocado.
Wow, that quick. You kind of fixed it like that quick. Wow.
Yeah, I had that ability as a child, and again, a memory through my grandmother that they wanted to put me in a special ed class because most likely because they couldn't understand what I was saying. And so
Yeah.
even now, like when I speak, people don't know I have any history with Jamaica, but the
Mhm.
tongue is a muscle. And so my muscle has been shaped by the environment that I'm in. And
Mhm.
so at the time, though, they considered my lack of being understood as someone that needed to not be at my grade level. And
Mhm.
my grandmother, who's from the US, from these systems, is rooted in the history, she knew what they were attempting to do. And she was not standing for it. And my mother wouldn't have necessarily known because she didn't know these systems either. And she said, no, you're not putting that child in special ed. And she said at the time I could read the newspaper. And so
Mhm.
she just sat in the front office, she said for days. And she refused to leave until they put me in the correct class. And she had me read the newspaper for them. And so she tells that story too of, yeah, they were trying to put you in this other class. And I was like, no, that child is smart.
Wow.
So navigating these systems, I'm grateful that I had someone that was African American and understood the system and all of its subtleties
Mhm.
to ensure
Mhm.
that I was protected.
Mhm. Wow. See, and I was just thinking, hi, Marilyn. Thank you for stopping in. Thank you, Marilyn. I was thinking that the immigrant story is a story that we don't share enough,
Mm-hmm.
right? The trauma, well, you don't call your experience a trauma, but some of us actually suffered some trauma from
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
transition,
yeah.
right?
No, I mean the definition too of trauma, because we all have these different experiences. We
Mhm.
we could all have these similar experiences, but how is it held in you? Do you have someone holding it with you? That's
Mhm.
what really turns it into a trauma. For
Mm.
someone with the same experience as myself, but with no Mami Ida there
Yeah.
on her side, that's
Yeah.
a trauma.
Yes, yes, yes. I
But
get
that
it.
trauma, I was able to navigate that with someone with way
With
more
her help.
experience and resources. And so in that moment, it was painful, but it didn't live in my
It
body
didn't live in your
because
body.
she was there to say, no, you're not doing this.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. Love that explanation. But yeah, so I feel like, that story, the immigrant story, is one that we should share more often. I think people stuff that story, and yeah, I'd love to see us own that part of our
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much nuance there, and that's part of why we don't share it, because beyond my experience in the school system, then like in the projects, there
Mhm.
definitely was trauma there, and my grandmother
Yeah.
was there to protect me from that. And the vast majority of the trauma came at the hands of the African American community that I was a part of. And again, I was able to see it from this expanded view, and so I didn't associate it with African Americans are doing this to me. I saw the larger system of what had been done. And
Mhm.
I called it, I didn't call it that at the time, but my language now is an initiation. And so I was
Mhm.
initiated into the African American experience.
Wow.
Very, very difficult initiation.
Oh my goodness. Tell us. Wow.
So part of like, there was one place that we lived in the Bronx, and we lived in this house. I mostly grew up in the projects, but we had 3 years of living in a house.
Yeah. So relief.
And that was when my sister's father was in the picture, and he did well. And so we lived in this house, and so we were next to the projects. And it appeared that we were more well off. And so we would sometimes, get jumped, or like our things would, there would be an attempt to steal our things.
Yeah.
And because I was from the projects, like I understood what was happening in the neighboring projects, and I understood that I was now in a different position.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was on the receiving end.
Mm-hmm.
And after those 3 years were over, we went right back into the projects. I was like, I'm home.
Wow.
Different projects, but yeah, that the project experience of having so many people there that are under resourced, and also navigating a system that tells you that you are less than. And for me, and the experience of Jamaica, is I knew there was a place and a land where there were people that looked like me, and people that looked like me that were in power. Now, here in the US, you have Obama that has been president. And so these kind of Black people in power, legitimately so, because
Yeah.
Harriet Tubman, I love Harriet Tubman, like she's a woman that was in her power, and that came through an act of resistance. But in
Mm-hmm.
Jamaica, I have this historical understanding of Black people do occupy spaces of power. And so bringing that with me into the projects, I didn't use that against African American folk who had a different history. And I feel like sometimes that's what gets in the way diasporically, that there's not enough appreciation for this very, very unique experience of Black folk in America.
Wow. Yeah, you said a lot there. You said a lot there because see, my mind is still trying to catch up. Tori said that part, people that look like me that were in power.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I have a big long question, and I'm just gonna ask a question, and then I'm gonna give you the floor, right? Because I know we have a topic. But here is my thing. I just want to set things up. It's a long question, so bear with me.
Okay.
I have I'm putting my unenlightened thoughts on out in the open
Mhm.
because I'm seeking understanding. And maybe I'm speaking for others too, or asking questions that others have. But first, let me be clear. I am a proud melanated woman. I am proud and grateful for the way I was crafted. My complexion is perfect, and I love it. I love the complexion of all of us, from the so called lightest to the darkest. I love it all. The same way I love our hair. I love our hair. I'm not wearing my own hair right now, but if I were, I would not be combing down the baby hairs and plastering down my edges. I would have them looking nappy because I like the way that looks, right? And so, but I have some discomfort around the term Black to describe us. And I've given thought to why Black bothers me. It's a long question. And two things. One, the color. And I feel like it might be the designer in me, but when I hear black, my brain conjures up this. This is what I think of when I hear black, right? And I've seen very dark skin from, say, the Congo, where it's dark. You know that dark brother that's very popular on social media now. He walks around without the shirt, and he's strutting around, and he walks to Shaggy's Mr. Bombastic. He's beautiful, right? And his skin is so dark, it's almost purple. But to my brain, that is not black, right? So that's part one of the question. Part two, in a minute. And by the way, I also take issue with white and yellow people. I take issue with that. And so I do want to ask the audience at this juncture, are you quite comfortable with the term Black to describe you? That's one. And have you ever wondered where the term Black came from pertaining to us? So the second part of my question is the tone that's synonymous with Black people is jarring to me, right? It's so emphasized. It's like a lot of emphasis goes into saying the word Black to describe us, that it doesn't feel complimentary. So black almost feels derogatory or insulting. And I feel like it was never meant respectfully towards us. So, like, where did the term black come from to describe us? Where did we learn we were black? Whose idea was it to call us black people? Wasn't that handed down to us from the colonizers via the transatlantic slave trade? And then we picked it up in the 60s and 70s, right? So, one, the term black to describe us. Two, whose idea was it to call us black? And are we comfortable being called black?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you for the vulnerability of your question, especially to the vulnerability of your question in this very public space.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, and being able to sit with the nuance of all of the things that are moving through you and that you're sharing with me. And so I just want to first say that I honor your question.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Because these aren't like, oftentimes when we attempt to have these conversations, it takes on a different meaning, and then it's met with animosity or projection.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I do collective trauma facilitation.
Yeah.
And my intention is to be able to hold these spaces for Black folk, which means that one needs to create these spaces to have these kinds of conversations. Because if we're not having the conversation in a group setting, in a collective setting, then it's just happening within us and it never actually gets settled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And in answering the question about the word Black, in all honesty, I was opposed to the word Black for the longest time. And I was opposed to the word Black because what the dictionary definition says of Black, and because of the juxtaposition of Black and white and how it's used historically, and that Black is then associated with this negative.
Yeah.
And I remember teaching at a high school in Oakland, California, and there was this conversation around Blackness. And I said, I'm not going to use the word Black. Like, there's no other group of people. Like, most people are rooted in a place that they're from.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they are defined.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes really reductive to then define them by color. And this color scheme thing is something that has come out of racism.
Right.
And so I said, y'all are African. Like, stop removing yourself from the continent. And then fast forward, I married an African.
Oh.
Yeah. And I was just like, I'm not African. And not to say that I'm like, not to say that I'm neglecting or denying my African indigeneity. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm honoring that there is a history that he was rooted in. There's a culture, a specificity. Like, there are things that I had to learn about with being with him. Language, dress, practices, what worked, what didn't work. And then when you consider the entire continent, that there's even more specificity and nuances depending on the country, the region one comes from. And so to really honor that as something distinct that I have access to, but there's also something distinct about being Jamaican, and then something distinct about being a foundational Black American as well. So honoring that. And I have an MFA in poetry, so I'm really big on words.
Yes, yes.
So I was just like, well, what word do I use?
Yes, what word? Please help me. Help me.
And I was looking at historically too, who am I where? And so, like, looking at historically in the books, there's a point where we're called African, and then once we're put on the ship, then we're called slave. And then something that happens at a certain point in history, then we're called African American if you're here, or you're called something else if the boat dropped you off somewhere else, and how it just continued to shift, and Negro, and then the other N word, all of these ways of redefining oneself. So I had to settle on something. It's something that holds all of us.
Yeah.
There was also one other thing. I went to Cornell for undergrad, and there was an article written at the time about Nelson Mandela.
Mm-hmm.
And the person described Nelson Mandela as African American. And I saw in that them describing Nelson in this newspaper article, I think was student written. And so in this newspaper article, I saw this hesitancy even of like calling him Black, but then South African, also there's white South African. So then calling someone African may not always mean Black. And the term then for Black became African American, which didn't really fit him at all.
Mm-hmm.
I was attentive to that. So I love that Black is one syllable. So this is me as like,
Okay.
And also Black, when I think of the word Black, I think of it not in the limited ways that racism has shaped it, but I think of it as Black as the universe. When we think of the Blackness of the universe and how that holds the everything, and how that is also where like creative power for the universe is. And so when we look at physics, Black is not associated with the negative. Black is associated with the space of creation.
Got it. Teach, Antoinette, teach.
And this diasporic experience that we are in means that we get to create who we are. We get to reclaim who we are. And I've done some of the ancestry.com things. I've gone to Jamaica to find relatives. I accept now that there are spaces in my identity that will remain in the unknown as well. I didn't grow up with my father. There are siblings I still haven't found. Of course, part of the enslavement systems was to disconnect us and erase our histories. So there are a lot of things that I am disconnected from. And in order to not feel fragmented, I then create what I will put in the gaps. And I also create a new relationship with the gaps. If I don't have that power in my own life, then this life won't feel very good.
Mm-hmm.
So Black for me is coming out of creation. I get to redefine what that is. And then the last is Ta-Nehisi Coates in Between the World and Me. I loved the way he spoke about Blackness. And it was that as soon as Africans were put on the boat, then Blackness got created because we were then being taken away from our source. And what is the word that still keeps us connected, no matter where we were sent diasporically, because we are all over the world now. And so Blackness became this tribe that regardless of the language we were then going to be speaking or the cultures we were taking on or the other identities we were taking on, that as soon as we were put on the boat, that got created, but in an empowering way. So oftentimes we have to renegotiate our relationship with the word. And in renegotiating our relationship with the word, people also get to choose, no, that word doesn't work for me. Choose another word. And in choosing another word, like, is there agreement? Because then you may be in that word on your own. So it's also an agreement as well.
Because here's the interesting thing, right? Here's what's interesting. Although Black, the word, doesn't sit comfortably with me, Negro does. Negro does. And when I hear the word Negro, it feels spiritual to me. It feels like we are revered as a spiritual collective. That's what my brain conjures up when I hear the word Negroes to describe us. So a Negro is Spanish for Black.
It is.
So what is my problem with that word Black?
It is. It's Spanish for Black, but then when you look at it, it could also be like the negating of growing too. And when you think of some of the movements about how do we define ourselves, the the Harlem Renaissance. Before it was called the Harlem Renaissance, it was actually called the New Negro Movement. And I loved that term as opposed to the Harlem Renaissance, because the Harlem Renaissance is a place-based movement.
Yes.
The New Negro Movement is an embodied movement.
Yes.
It's a redefining of oneself. And there's a certain point where the word Negro went out of fashion too, because any word that we choose can be weaponized. And so I think that part of what you may be feeling is the way in which Black has been weaponized, and Negro has been weaponized as well. And I've heard Negro use it as slur.
Yes. Yes.
I've heard it used as slur. We could choose light beans, and that will be weaponized.
Yeah.
Oh, you a light bean, huh? Like, even the word woke has been weaponized.
Yes, right.
Like, who wants to claim that they are perpetually asleep? Like, the awakening, even the Buddha, like, enlightenment is about this awakening. But when Black folk relate to it as this source of power, now woke is weaponized. Even like the kumbaya, which is now used to say that one is okay with everything. No, that was a source of power. And it's been used the same way in which woke has been used. So no matter what word we use, language has been a tool and also a weapon. African has been weaponized. That was the insult for me as a child, you know? You're an African booty scratcher. What does that even mean?
Wow.
Yeah. Everything that we can lean on to really reinforce ourselves can be weaponized. So through that, I stick to the scientific relationship with the word Black. And I also look at the manifestos around the word Black and how it really has been this source of strength. James Brown, I'm Black and I'm proud. So I think in any other in any other conversation, one could say, oh, let these other folks define Black, and it's a derogatory thing. But like, Black folk have really poured in their essence to uplift that word.
Yes.
And because they have given blessing.
Yes.
Then this is also like how I honor it.
Yes. Makes wonderful sense. And Prophet Mother says, I love when we make space for each other to make our own choices. Absolutely.
Because, I also used to walk around, because I grew up in the projects. So I used to go around and like say the N-word all the time too.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it's not all the time, but it just would come out. It would come out when it would come out. There are just some things where it's just the best like way to say a thing. I mean, even my grandmother from the South, like, she'd be like, yeah, I'm seeing my N-word today. Like she just,
wow.
That's her being like, spunky. I'm going out, and she ain't going anywhere. But she'd be like, yeah, my N-word called me. And so it just would come out in conversation. And so even with her, I'm like, ooh, so you heard from your, and she's like, yeah. Wow. So it just would come out. But yeah, even with that, like that reclamation process, and that is really a challenging conversation to have, and whose mouth does it get to come out of, and what are the ways in which it's coming out, and is it calling in certain things vibrationally? And I said the N-word, this was way back in college, to a Black man who grew up in love, and like that wasn't part of his language. He was like, please don't call me that. And I was like, really? And like, I grew up in the project, so like I didn't carry the same meaning with it. But as I started to expand my social circle during college, then this was the first time that a Black man was just like, please don't use that word with me. I was like, wow, there are people that say don't use that word? Yeah. First for me.
Wow. So, okay. So now the Black body as a sanctuary. That's so much for my mind to think about. Elaborate.
When I think of my relationship with my body, I was not raised to believe it to be sanctuary. I wasn't safe in my own body. And I mean, I don't know the experience with other Jamaican folk, but the ways in which I was beat, this wasn't sanctuary.
Yeah.
And I was raised also to believe that someone outside of me had power over my body. And so that was my mother, right? She had power over my body. And then you send out into the world this little Black girl who doesn't believe that she has power over her own body. So then the violence is just kept piling on.
Yes.
Because I was trained to never say, this is mine.
Yeah.
And that these things won't happen with my body.
Yeah.
So eventually from the violences, it then manifested as illness. And again, like, this body was not sanctuary. It was the source of so much suffering. And eventually, like, having to get surgery and fibroids and endometriosis and all of these things, and like wanting, like praying to just have my uterus just fall out. Just, can I just cut my own womb open and take it out? I just remove these things from my body. It was more like a war zone. That's how I related to my body.
Wow.
And I saw that through the illness experience, and I saw that through the healing experience. And I had to change my relationship with my body in order for me to heal. That was the process. I stopped cursing my womb, and I just started speaking to the fibroids and, what are you here to teach me? And listening to the point where I tapped into body wisdom. So then through body wisdom, you know, my body was telling me, I don't like these places. I don't like this company. I don't like these foods. I would not listen to something that I associate with war zone. But as I developed a healthier relationship with my body, then it became sanctuary. It became the place that I trusted more than someone outside of me.
Okay. So
And to do it for myself too, because it could be interpreted in some other way, because anything that we take on as a source of power can be manipulated in some way. So when I say the Black body is sanctuary, it doesn't mean that it's sanctuary for someone else. It's for me and me relationship. This is me and an inner me. This is me and my soul, me and my spirit. Like this, the we is here. I am a collective experience, and this is a sanctuary for me. And if being in your presence somehow undermines my sanctuary experience, and I don't need to know you anymore. When my body starts protesting, you must know my sanctuary. Yeah.
So you've made your body a safe space for you, and you protect your body space, because that is your sanctuary. That's the place that holds self, and self is most sacred, because self is connected to the universe.
Yeah. And so when I was in the hospital, I got really clear on this. When I was in the hospital, wasn't nobody else in that bed with me. It was me and my body. It didn't matter what anyone else had to say. Whatever illnesses manifested, whatever feelings were there, it was me and me. And so I had to get right with me.
So Donna says, hi, Winsome guests and everyone. Hi, Donna. The Bible says your body is a temple, but what that means is not taught at a young age to gatekeep it for marriage.
Yeah. And so, the body is a temple. The only thing is, we're taught to relate to our bodies as temples only in the conversation of marriage. But what if we're taught to relate to the body as temples, even with my mother? Because then parenting would change. I'm only supposed to step into the idea of my body as temple when I think of giving my body away to someone in marriage. No, I'm going to consider my body as temple for me.
Yeah.
For me.
Right.
And if I really embrace that, you know how many systems would crumble? And I think of what we've inherited through the trauma and the wounds of slavery and Black subjugation. There are so many systems that try to communicate to us that our bodies, our Black bodies, could never be sanctuary. Like there was a mental illness that later on, it didn't last long, but there was a mental illness. The word was drapetomania. And drapetomania was Negroes that tried to run free.
Wow, that was a mental illness?
Yes. Wow. And so if a person somehow thought that their bodies were meant for freedom and they attempted to run away, they received a diagnosis of a mental illness. And the cure, guess what the cure was?
Beating.
Whippings.
Yes.
So there were legal systems that told us our bodies weren't sanctuary. There were healthcare systems that told us our bodies weren't sanctuary. And cultural systems, social systems, financial systems. Our bodies were cryptocurrency, in fact.
Right.
Our bodies were vessels to birth babies that could be sold away. Or even like being raised within Christianity, like, Lord, give me strength as you're beating a child, that God has sanctioned the beatings. So really like changing our relationship with our bodies and like considering what would it look like to walk with that, to practice it, not just to have it as an idea. How would you show up differently if you really took it on? Like, what would you do differently if you took on, my body is sanctuary?
Wow. My body is a safe space.
Yeah. What might shift for you?
That would take some reconditioning because we're so steeped in our habits and stuff, like even the way that we eat, how we don't exercise, that kind of thing. Yeah.
It would shift so many things. It shifted who I've been in relationship with.
True.
People that don't understand sanctuary don't get to like be in my inner circle. And it doesn't mean that I judge people and how they show up.
Right.
Because my body is sanctuary, then someone's proximity to me depends on their understanding of sanctuary. I'm around many people, but it doesn't mean that they get access to the inner circle.
Yes.
And so while people are on their journey and they're in their discovery process, they can be, whether I say they can be or not, like it's not up to me. They be. And I negotiate their proximity.
You negotiate their proximity. You decide how close they get to come.
Yeah. But the first thing for me was I actually had to learn sanctuary before I could negotiate any of that. So I spent 6.5 months living in a Buddhist monastery. And while I was there, I was learning sanctuary. I didn't know this ahead of time, but the first night there, I just started crying. We were in meditation and I started crying because my body felt safe for the first time. Like I didn't actually know that I'd never felt safe. I didn't know. There are different levels to safety. And I didn't there was a level that I'd never touched before. And in that monastery, I just started crying, and like my body, there was something that shifted, and I was like, every Black person should feel this. I want that for every Black person.
To feel safe in your body.
Mm-hmm.
To feel safe wherever you are.
Yeah.
In your body.
Yeah.
Oh,
and so part of my assignment there was to know intimately sanctuary, to embody sanctuary. And then I had an invitation to stay and to become a monk, but my assignment was to leave and be sanctuary wherever I am, and to share sanctuary and to create sanctuary. Because we also have our spiritual traumas as well. And so you don't have to, whatever you're negotiating with your God, like I don't want to undermine that. There is a sanctuary experience that we can all embody, regardless of how we choose to worship. It all starts with the body. That was enslavement. Enslavement started with the body.
yeah.
On the body. Our bodies remember that.
Our bodies remember. Donna's last Black body was ownership to cattle slavery.
And so like that embodying sanctuary, when you practice that, it just starts to heal like so much of the lineage. Imagine there were whole systems created where babies were born into spaces where their bodies would never be loved.
That's profound.
And there are centuries of our ancestors that were born into this world and died and never had their bodies loved.
Not even by themselves.
Not even by themselves, because part of the programming was
Yeah.
that body was there to serve a white supremacist system. And any attempt to reclaim that body was met with violence.
Yeah. That's a lot of programming. And a lot of deprogramming that needs to happen.
Yeah. And so we don't notice it. So here I'm going to tell on myself, but I've told this on like Facebook before. I, at one point, attempted to be, I've attempted so many things. One was to be a prostitute, an escort, and a stripper. And the stripper was after I received my Cornell degree. So it doesn't matter the accolades. It doesn't matter the accomplishment, like how my body is programmed will override any of that. And so I share this specifically because I have this Ivy League degree. At this point, I have 2 Ivy League degrees. So like I share it so that we know that it's a much more expansive conversation, because I have these degrees that says, you know, I should know better. Or I should know how to create value without going to the body. But I also had experienced rape and sexual violence. And so in the presence of, I'm struggling for money, what do? I remembered, oh, well, people clamor for this body.
Yeah.
So I was no longer tapped into what I had available to me through my intelligence, through my resourcefulness, through my connections with others. Like all of that went away because of the nature of trauma. And the only thing that returned to me was, this body has a value to it. Let me get that value.
This body has a value to it.
Yeah. And so like through my healing process, I've learned that this body does have a value, but like it's understood in a different way. But at the time it was just flesh. Now, mind you, my stripping career didn't last. It only lasted about 3 hours because it only lasted 3 hours There was and because I come from
Your
sexual,
body couldn't handle it. Your
know,
body rejected it, did it? No.
I've had a lot of traumas and violence in my life that I wasn't protected from, and so I incorporate all of those things into my stories. And there are things that I wasn't protected from, and so like that path, God put a stop to that path immediately. That's what happened. So I was in the back of the club. They had people work the lunch shift as a starting point because the lunch shift was smaller and much more gentle and easy. And so like the new girl started the lunch shift, and they asked what my stripper name would be. And even then I was connected and I said, oh, my stripper name is Divine.
Wow.
And so I'm in the back of the club and I have on my robe, and I never took my robe off because like all of my traumas were definitely being activated in that moment. I wasn't conscious of it, but all of them were. And there was a man that had come in during his lunchtime. He said it was like in San Francisco in the business district. And there was a man that said he'd like to go in during his lunchtime and just be in the strip club. And so he was standing in the back of the room talking to me. And whatever was his industry, like I knew about his industry. So I was speaking about his industry with fluency. And that threw him off. And I'm asking him deep questions about his industry, and I was deeply interested in it. And then he was like, where'd you go to school?
Yeah.
I was like, Cornell. And he was like, what are you doing here? And I looked at him and I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I did an about face.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that man, I call it, I found God in a strip club. That man was such a mirror for me. I couldn't see myself. And I saw myself through him and his generosity.
Good question. Yes. Yes. What are you doing here?
What are you doing here? And I left. But while I was there, I also saw like just looking at bodies, and the people that were coming in during the lunch hour were also disabled bodies. And I saw the strippers like in this act of service with the disabled bodies of touching them gently. And I was like, oh, wow. People don't consider that disabled bodies also have sexual desires.
Never crossing my mind.
Yeah, like are in need of touch, are in need of gentleness. Because we have this relationship with disabled bodies that is not allowing for full humanity. It was telling that for disabled bodies to be touched gently, that they had to pay for it. But I just witnessed the beauty of the women there relating to the men as humans with needs, and that touch is such a core part of the human experience, and society doesn't often view disabled bodies in that way.
Wow. The body, the Black body as a sanctuary. It's a deep conversation. Let me see. I was looking for some slides. Now you had appeared at a TEDx.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And what was the topic of that? Death by chocolate?
Death by chocolate, sis. What if my illness had a voice? So when I gave that talk, I was in my MFA program, Masters of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at Columbia. And I had surgery the year before. And so that talk is about my surgery experience. Before I gave that talk, I only told a handful of people about the surgery because I carried a lot of shame that I needed to have surgery. I have a very muscular body, even if I don't exercise. So I related to my body as powerful, as strong, like this body does not get sick. And then for me ending up in the hospital, I just noticed my shame around my own like identity with my body. And so I didn't tell a lot of people. So the TEDx talk was really my first time of outing myself that this body had needs.
And
And
so,
yeah.
was that after the work with the body sanctuary work, or
That was
before?
before. This is part of my becoming process. It was
Gotcha.
illness that really humbled me.
Mm-hmm.
Illness that really stopped that fast moving trauma train.
Mm-hmm.
My body made it clear that if I continued to live that path, that I would end up in the grave. And I no longer had the capacity to suppress.
Yeah.
I no longer had the capacity to be in the programming. And also what shifted during that surgery experience was I came back talking about ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
So I think my own proximity to death,
Mm-hmm.
the veil thinning,
Mm-hmm.
helped me really get the expansiveness of this human experience, and that is not just me. And that allowed me to have way more compassion for my body as well, because
Yeah.
I was thinking like, what is happening to my body? What's wrong here? And I realized that there were bodies before mine that had these experiences. So this thing that my womb was carrying, it was
Yeah.
a collective wound. It wasn't just mine. And if
Mm-hmm.
because it's a collective wound, then how about I tap into the collective and the ancestors to also help me, to
Mm-hmm.
support me in the healing process? Because it holds stories that are centuries old. It's not my responsibility to carry it by myself. And that then speaks to like Black Exhale as an
Right.
organization. And like we try to heal these ancestral and collective wounds individually, this rugged individualism. And these are collective wounds, these are ancestral wounds. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so we need the collective to be able to hold it. And I know oftentimes like resilience is used as a compliment, but
Yeah.
that resilience is that's a that's a plural word. Like resilience means to tap into that collective. When you try to do this individual resilience, that's too much to carry. That's too much
That's a lot to
responsibility.
carry. Yes, it really is a lot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and yet we hold that up as the place to be. No, for me, resilience is a plural,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't know how to like do that collectively.
So, is that the basis for your nonprofit, Black Exhale?
It is the basis for the nonprofit. You went away. Where are you? Like, am I?
Oh, I'm here. I'm here.
I felt lonely. We're talking about
I'm
collective
going
work.
around the screens, showing slides and everything.
Yes. But it was funny just because it was beautiful that I asked, where are you in this very moment? Because we're talking about this collective work. And I just felt really alone in this moment.
Ah,
I was like, where are
we're
you?
here. I know. Oh my goodness. We're here. We're here.
Oh, that was beautiful. But yes, for Black Exhale, it serves several purposes. One, when I said in the monastery, like all Black people should feel this. There was another retreat experience where I felt like just so much love being poured into my body energetically, and I was like, all Black people should feel this much love. And so, like, how to actually make manifest with that? How do I share this with other Black folk? Also, what are the spaces where we can center Blackness and heal the spaces between us? And what are the spaces where we can take on intra-racial healing? So often we speak about interracial healing, so
Yeah.
healing
Yeah.
across the color lines.
Uh-huh.
All of these things are necessary. So it's not to negate interracial healing um, as something to take on and to develop, but intra-racial healing, what would that look like? Because the truth is, all of the physical violences I've experienced have been at the hands of Black folk.
Mm.
The communities that I've grown up in, the people that look like me are the ones that also have hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't
Mm-hmm.
say that with any like animosity or like this is who Black people are. And that happens too, and
Yeah.
that doesn't work. Um, but the violences that I've experienced have been at the hands of people like me, people that have pushed me out of their womb, people that like are blood related, the siblings.
Yeah.
And so where do we heal that? And then because I also was born in Jamaica, grew up in the projects in Harlem and the Bronx, was loved on by a Black Southern woman, and was once married to a Ghanaian. I have this like diasporic view of Blackness. And I
Mm-hmm.
hear the conversations and the ways we talk about one another throughout the diaspora. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like, how do we also create those spaces where we can heal the spaces between us as Jamaicans or African Americans or Africans or wherever other Black folk are, and
Mm-hmm.
things that get in the way of us actually coming together? How can we heal those wounds? And we're so often preoccupied with violences and systems outside of us that we don't focus on us and the space in
Yeah.
between us.
Yeah.
So that has to intentionally be created, but sanctuary has to be present. Because if
Mm-hmm.
I say, let's heal the space in between us, and you're afraid of me,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going
Mm-hmm.
to be vulnerable. Like the word vulnerable by definition means able to be hurt. That's what vulnerable means.
Vulnerable.
Yeah. The word vulnerable means able to be hurt. And
Mm-hmm.
so to ask someone to be vulnerable in a place where they're expecting harm,
Yes. Yeah.
you're not
That's a tough one. Nobody's gonna open up to that.
No
Mm-hmm.
one's going to open up to that. And so,
Mm-hmm.
how do you create sanctuary space? I see that as the foundation. Create sanctuary spaces so we can get this work done and we can
Mm-hmm.
start to heal the wounds in between us.
So that goes right back to self-love
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and teaching self-love.
Mm-hmm.
That goes, there's a scripture in the Bible that goes, seek ye first the kingdom of God,
Mm-hmm.
and all other things will be added. And I think of the kingdom of God as within us, right? And seek ye first, meaning get to know you first, get to love you first. Once you develop that stance where you are anchored in self-love, and you are become a sanctuary then for yourself and for your body, your existence, everything else begins to fall into proper place.
Yeah, yeah. And to balance that though, because you said that's teaching self-love. And so like a lot of my work is rooted in trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I also think that what's missing is that we don't tell or inform what is self-hate. What does that look like?
Right.
Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
what are the ways that we diminish ourselves?
Exactly.
And
Mhm.
so because so much of this work came through my illness experience, and then narrative medicine and working with doctors to understand what was happening to my body and the narratives around my body, the work of doctors is to diagnose.
Mhm.
And I think that this collective work also needs to be diagnosed. Like it's been beautifully helpful for me to get, oh, that's a trauma response. Oh, I called it a strength, but that
Right.
was actually trauma.
Right.
And if I can't diagnose, and not diagnose to pathologize a thing or a person or a culture, because again, anything that we use to get free could also be weaponized. I'll just keep repeating that. But diagnose so that we can then develop agency and consciousness around a thing and um, choose to operate differently,
Yeah.
choose to operate in this expanded way. So for me, in addition to like teaching what self-love is, to meet someone where they are as well. And what are the ways that we're harming ourselves, or what are the ways that we are surviving? How does
Mhm.
survival serve us? So
Mhm.
also loving up the parts of ourselves that have hurt us. For example, and this is not to be sadomasochistic, but um, when I entered into my marriage, um, as I was going through my divorce process, I I felt shame about the Antoinette that chose to marry the person that I married. And the truth is that Antoinette does not need my shame. She needs my love.
Mm.
I had to look back at that Antoinette and see
Oh, that's
why
good.
she didn't know what safety felt like.
Ah,
And
that's good.
that Antoinette did the best that she could.
My
And for
goodness.
me, safety was because I've always been on this journey of safety. When you grow up
Mhm.
in violence, that just becomes your life mission. And so
Right.
like, safety has evolved in a healthy way. But for me at the time, safety was a very flat experience, and it meant that someone wouldn't physically harm me.
Right.
I
Mhm.
didn't look to see, oh, does someone do their shadow work? What is their emotional capacity?
Mhm.
Um, I didn't look to see like what are their relationships with their family? Is it healed or is it a suppressed space? I didn't know how to vet because I didn't do that for myself either. So I don't blame anything on anyone else. I understand that the way I see them, it matches the way in which I see myself. Um, but for me back then, safety meant someone wouldn't beat the shit out of me.
Right. Right. Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
because that
Mhm.
was my upbringing.
That was your upbringing.
That was my
Mhm.
upbringing. And so like, that person is safe. Oh, that
Mhm.
person didn't try to rape me. That
Mhm.
person is safe. And
Mhm.
so for Antoinette, the Antoinette that chose this person, like the person that I ended up marrying, like never tried to sexually violate me.
Right.
And so
Right.
like, I was like, I love him. I think I love him. But I didn't look in any other way. And like that Antoinette, she does not need my judgment. She needs to be acknowledged. She chose someone who was not physically violent. Thank you, Antoinette.
That's so good. That's so good. That's causing me to look at shame in the broader perspective as in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
My shame doesn't need judgment. What I need is compassion.
Yeah.
Compassion for that part
Yeah.
of me that made those decisions.
Yeah. Even compassion for your shame.
Compassion for
Compassion
the
for
shame.
your shame, either. Like the shame serves us in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Like so when I think of the shame around the choices that Antoinette made, that shame was telling me that I want more for myself,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I don't actually know how to have that more. And so that shame, all of those emotions, I love up all of them. I love up the shadows. I love all of them. Yeah. That's how to be a fully integrated being. So when I say sanctuary, I don't mean that in this sanctuary it's just going to be like nyam nyahore and kyo. No, like when it's sanctuary, the shadow gets to sit with us too. And so sometimes people have a challenging time being with me, not Black people. So non-Black people sometimes have, because shame is such a huge thing for whiteness as
Yeah.
well. And so
Yeah.
when I speak on a thing, shame shows up in
Yeah.
their world.
Yes.
And then I've done something to them.
Yes. Yes.
So sanctuary doesn't mean that it will all feel good. It doesn't mean it will all feel good, but it means that there is a space for that other feeling too.
Mhm. There is a space for that other feeling too. Yeah, that's good.
Bring it all, bring it all. I meet your shame with humility. I meet your shame with love. I meet your judgment, your self judgment with humility and love. If
Mm.
we could do that for one another, if we could do that for ourselves, then we won't need to project onto another. I know that's why I could sit here and say I tried to be a stripper. Like,
Right.
it doesn't define anything about me. And also, like, there are strippers in the world that are beautiful people. Like, it doesn't mean a thing about a person. I can be with it fully because I
Mhm.
love my shadows.
Mhm.
And I send love to my shadows, and my shadows love me. and I can consciously be with my shadows. I don't need to show up in the world with some false identity. And there was once that my ex like tried to say, well, yeah, you tried to be a prostitute before. And I was like, ooh, if I hadn't done my work, that would have hurt.
But not this time, buddy.
But you know, because we turn away from our shadows and we consider that evolution means that we have no shadows, and that's the positivity, the toxic positivity.
Yes.
And we can't, and like so many people try to coach me out of my negative experiences and try to coach me out of my traumas, try to coach me out of like me sharing about the violence. No, I had a violent childhood. Like I get this. Like I don't need someone to make me feel better. I don't feel bad.
Yeah.
It's just what is. It's what is. And I don't need someone to take it away, but the world is really uncomfortable when you present your shadow in that way, because part of like these structures is, you know, pretend that you don't have a shadow.
Yes.
So people don't know how to be with a person that has
it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's how people get you. And so no, I know what I tried to do, and there's no shame there for me. And I've dealt with the shame that I had around that.
We're all wired for survival, and there is no shame in that. So what are some of the embodiment work that you do with Black Exhale?
Well, you know, last night there was actually a project launched, an exhibit that was exhibited, and the exhibit is still up in Brooklyn. So June 15th, yesterday was the launch, and it goes through August 15th. So some of the things that Black Exhale do are very project-based, and then I'm currently working on programs that would not be project-based, but are like we can continue to do. But that project in particular is about visiting African burial grounds as these sites of trauma, and how do we transform sites of trauma into spaces of healing. And so the project is called Reparations in Public Space, Reclaiming Sacred Ground. And so a lot of the work that I do is about this timelessness, like involving the past, the present, and the future. And that's how you get to be this fully integrated being. And a project that I'm currently working on is about creating these spaces where we can come together without it being like led by a person, but what does community healing look like?
Yes.
We create these spaces. It doesn't matter the place, but it's about the spaces in between us. And in those spaces, we get to talk about those taboo things. Like even this conversation with you, that we've created a space where we can talk about these things. And so what does it look like to create that wherever we are?
Wherever we are.
Wherever we are.
Yes.
And there's so many things we don't speak about that's in the Black home, the Black neighborhood, the Black community, our ancestors as well, the futures we want to create, some of the things that happens to our bodies and the health statistics, or the things that we struggle through alone. What would it look like to curate spaces where this aloneness no longer has to be the way?
That is beautiful. Where this aloneness doesn't have to be the way. And I guess that's kind of some of what I try to do with this program, with this show as well. Create community for collective healing. Yes. Oh my goodness. We are winding down time, and I had some more questions and points, but we're coming up on our time. But
you went away again. Come back.
Yes. Well, oh, wait a minute. Okay, hold on.
Okay,
okay, here we go. No, we're talking about not being alone. Come on now. Dee says, I actually felt embarrassed about choosing some partners I have chosen throughout my life. I understand. I now know that I did things out of love, and those decisions were the best that I could at that time.
Yes.
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 When you know better, you do better.
And you know, like that understanding for me came out of me practicing ancestral work. And so like my ancestral work again started post surgery because of my proximity. They made sure I stayed in my body. And I remember taking on this journaling practice because I didn't have a healthy understanding of ancestry. Well, because I come from violence, then I just thought, oh, all of them people are just violent. Like I don't want anything to do with people I came from. And so whenever people would speak about ancestry, I just like, whatever. They need to stop with all that ancestry stuff. And so I voiced that. I was in a training with Queen Afua, and I voiced that like every time she said ancestry.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that I really wasn't feeling it. That every time she said ancestry, and so like. Because it got me ready to be in this course, and like I was gonna get everything I can out of it, and it was you talk about ancestry, and like I didn't want to sit with this like every time she did. And some people that messaged me in the chat like, "Thank you for saying that because I feel the same way." and, and so after that, I just took on. I had a journaling practice already, but I took on journaling about ancestry. Just that was it, journaling ancestry, and I just took that on for 30 days. So one, journaling about ancestry, but also journaling to the ancestors. And it was beautiful. Like throughout that 30 days, the message that came that really shifted things for me was the ancestors saying to not be ashamed of the ways in which they've survived. That was a request that they made of me, to
Do
not be
not be
ashamed
ashamed of
of
the
the
way.
ways in which they've survived.
Yeah, I love that.
And
That
so,
that
like,
speaks to me.
part of that survival, like they survived imposing violence upon one another as well. And when I got that, then the message came back to me, which was, Antoinette, to not be ashamed of the ways in which you've survived.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the beauty of ancestry work. The gift always comes back to you. So once I stopped judging them, then I stopped judging me.
Do not be ashamed of the ways in which what you had to do to survive.
Yeah. Not even like what you had to do, because that too adds its own judgment. Because some people will say, you didn't have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Just look at the pockets where people throw in judgments, and yourself too. But just keep it as clean as possible, to not be ashamed of the ways in which you've survived.
The ways in which you survive.
Yeah. Because had it not been for their survival, I wouldn't be.
Mm. Oh,
and it's not to condone, it's not to say I'm going to live my life this way for the rest of my life. It's just being with it as is. As it is. I don't work through the lens of forgiveness. I work through the lens of acceptance.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. If you look at the root of forgiveness, at the root of forgiveness is something went wrong. Something shouldn't have been a certain way. Judgment, blame, that's at the root of it. Imagine, so to take it out of theory, imagine someone came up to you and said, I forgive you for this thing that you've done. And you just know that you didn't do anything wrong. Then you're just like, did they just say they forgive me? Like, you already know when they're saying they forgive you for something, that in their mind, you did something wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would incense you if you knew that you'd, like, imagine too that, like, I'm thinking of even like a beating. And in the beating, I put up my hand to say enough.
Yeah.
And then someone says, I forgive you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
yeah.
that happens sometimes. And so sometimes forgiveness can be an act of violence. So I work on acceptance.
I'm glad you brought that up because I do struggle with that forgiveness thing, and I've just not been able to get comfortable with it yet.
But that's because the
So,
world lives off of Black forgiveness.
uh-huh.
Oh, this world is like that's manna. Black forgiveness. Everybody expects that Black folk would just forgive everything.
Forgive, right.
Yeah, no matter what happens. And that's a way of overriding. Forgiveness can be a trauma response.
It's like pacifying the abuser. What is that syndrome? What do you call that syndrome?
I don't know the name, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Forgiveness can be a trauma response. And it's not to say that there's not beauty in authentic, conscious, fully embodied forgiveness. But again, anything can be weaponized, including forgiveness. And oftentimes, forgiveness is a trauma response. Forgiveness, sometimes the way it shows up as trauma responses, I'm not actually going to be with this happened, and I'm not going to process it, and I'm not going to metabolize it, and I'm not going to fully express emotions.
Yes.
People expect that you forgive without actually expressing.
Yes.
And that's how I ended up in the hospital. I had never actually expressed anything that my body was holding on to, and holding on to all of that turned into illness. So I had to work on acceptance first, because again, one of the trauma responses is the ways that we disembody and the ways that we write these alternative narratives as well. That didn't hurt.
Right.
Acceptance means that did hurt.
That did hurt.
That did hurt. How can I forgive you if I can't actually even say that hurt? Actually, that hurt a lot. Like I feel that in my gut. I no longer trust myself. That's how much. Yeah, I'm now afraid of like going out and doing these things. That's how much it hurt.
Yeah, this is so good. We're gonna have to have another part. Christine says, okay, so Prophet Mother says, how do we begin with ancestry work?
Two things that come up for me is, one, you could interrogate what is the block, because sometimes we try to push past whatever is the block and get to the other side. So instead of doing that, like being with the block, so really investigating the block. And a second alternative, you could take on the same exercise that I did, which is journaling with and for the ancestors. I think of relationships. The reason why we have relationships, why we call them relationships, is because we've spent time with people. There's this exchange that happens. And the deeper the exchange, the deeper the relationship. And then there are some relationships that are so intact that no matter how much time is away, like that bond is there where like the channels are open to continue to share. And there are some relationships where when you're not with the people and there's no exchange in the channels, then the relationship withers. And so we don't have relationships with our ancestors because there's no channel open. And so take on curiosity. What's there? And when I say take on curiosity too, it's not like you're not deifying them. You're not worshiping them. You're also being very well boundaried, because not all ancestors do you want to connect to.
Right.
But take on being curious. And so even for like people with bodies out in the world that are not people that I want to be my friend, I can operate in curiosity and not feel like, oh my goodness, I'm afraid of them. So you could journal with curiosity. So those two things.
Wow. My goodness. This is so good, Antoinette. This is so good.
And I want to be sure to honor the title of the time.
Yes.
Say three things. And so I don't want people to watch this video and be like, that was clickbait.
Right.
Three things.
Right.
And so the first thing is to embrace embodied awareness. So this body is what has you live in this life. Have an awareness of how things land in your body. And so practices around how to embrace embodied awareness is having a loving relationship with your body. If you don't have a loving relationship, then you disembody. Also, you could try things like breath and meditation. The breath like brings you back to your body.
Yeah.
Yeah. So having that embodied awareness then allows you to tap into body wisdom. So that's one. Two, engage in creative self-expression. I went through my process of healing through writing.
Yes.
That's my book, Unruly, that comes out in January. That's my TED Talk. It's through creative self-expression. I think that one of the beautiful things about creativity is that it allows you to hold both beauty and brutality. Like, I love the work of poets. Poets don't turn away from a thing.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
allows it to be, it practices awareness. And so I didn't write my book from an intellectual space because I could have, but that's intellectual bypassing. I can sound really smart about a thing and not practice anything. So engage in creative self-expression, and journaling is the easiest way in. Like, you don't have to be an artist. You don't have to know what you're doing. And then, stories or creating visually as well, or dance or movement. I know that I've gotten some of access to some of the shadows through moving my body as well.
Yes.
And then the third is build sanctuary spaces, because doing this work in the space of harm will re-traumatize. And so building a sanctuary space can be interpreted in two different ways: internal sanctuary and external sanctuary. So for me, because I've spent so much time in building my internal sanctuary, I now have enough resources to then commit to building the external sanctuaries so that people can then practice their internal sanctuary in the spaces that I create. And so yeah, someone mentioned a somatic therapist as helping with body awareness. Yes. And building internal sanctuary could also mean working with the somatic therapist, working with the therapist in general, even if they're not a somatic therapist, going to workshops, doing trainings and courses. And then for your own self, like the external sanctuaries too, like finding a spot. You may have a home situation that is not sanctuary like. Can you find a corner there? If no, can you find a lake to walk next to, be with the earth. And it doesn't have to be that you are in sanctuary 24/7. Give yourself this respite, this beautiful respite. Like, that can be so nourishing. And accept what you can for like when you can, and then continue to carve out more and more spaces and protect that. I used to have something called I can't even remember what it was. Mini vacations. Mini vacations because I didn't have money to go on a vacation. So I would just have a mini vacation, and that's how I communicated. Like, instead of saying I'm stressed, don't talk to me, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go on a mini vacation, and I just hour and turn off my phone and go sit in a cafe somewhere and not do work.
Yes. Simple things that we can all of us can implement.
Yeah.
Wow.
Regardless of someone's economic status. Like, this is meant to be accessible because I come from the projects. So
right.
I live the life on food stamps. Like, I get it. Yeah. And there's also people with much more abundance, and I'm tapping into that life next.
Yes. Me too, girl. So yeah, so wherever you are too, wherever you are, you can practice these things.
Yeah.
My goodness, Antoinette, it was such a, oh my goodness, it was so nourishing to have you here today. And I can't believe our time is up. And oh my God, you must come back. You must come back.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all that you've shared today. You have certainly enlightened us and brought us up a little bit higher and a little bit deeper, and made us aware that we can create sanctuary for ourselves within our bodies.
Mhm. Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate your platform. I appreciate the conversations. Big up to you.
Oh, speaking of big up, just before you go, what is one thing you want to big up yourself for before we leave?
The one thing I want to big up myself for is falling in love with my shadow as much as my light.
Love it.
Mhm.
Perfect. Love it. Perfect. You hear that, guys? Fall in love with your shadow as much as your light. Mimi says, so much wisdom and enlightenment. Thank you, Antoinette. Thank you, guys, for showing up. Prophet Mother, D, Mimi, H&D was here. Yeah. Thank y'all so much. And we'll see you next week. We're going to have Queen Tandiwe here with us next week. Don't miss that also. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Stay on for a second, Antoinette.